Have you ever liked a thing when you were a kid, only to go back as an adult and realize, holy crap, this was actually about something?
I am the keymaster.
I am the gatekeeper.
Oh my god, they're talking about sex! Yeah, that was my experience with Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. When I was younger, little Spell Commander watched GX and went, la la la, superheroes. Then, I rewatched the show in all of its subtitled glory, only to realize that Hogwarts Yu-Gi-Oh! Had some frickin' layers to it. And I don't think that's more apparent than with the show's main protagonist, Jaden Yuki. At first glance, Jaden can seem like a character who doesn't really have a lot going on. A lot of early GX viewers compared him unfavorably with a character like Yugi Moto because he was bland by comparison. But by the end of the show, I actually think Jaden is way more defined and refined as a character than our beloved King of Games. The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Featured a heavily fictionalized version of real-world Egyptian mythology as a major part of its setting, but GX's lore was very different. It's made up of several different concepts, some of which were inspired by real-world history or beliefs, and some just original to the show. In a video that I did a few years back, I explained how I believe that the sacred beast monsters in GX were inspired by the biblical story of the Book of Exodus. It's a fun video and you should check it out, but very briefly, GX's sacred beast monsters are named after angels from the Jewish tradition. The season where they're featured also features the power of alchemy, which has some historical associations with Judaism and mysticism. The beasts appear to be alchemical replications of the Egyptian god monsters, the same way that Professor Banner created an alchemical replication of his own body when he got sick. So in the grand scheme of things, the idea is that God's angels would have taken the form of the sacred beasts to protect the Hebrew people from the Egyptian gods while they fled the kingdom of Egypt. And this isn't without complete support from the OG Yu-Gi-Oh! Either, as others have speculated that Exodia the Forbidden One might be the Hebrew god Yahweh, aka the Judeo-Christian god. Point being, there does appear to be an acknowledgement of Egypt's relationship with Judaism in the subtext of Yu-Gi-Oh's lore. And I really can't help but notice that in the Japanese version of the show, Jaden's real name is Judai. Now, let's assume that the name is religiously inspired. Judai is the reincarnation of an ancient king who is very loosely, maybe implied to be connected with the Sacred Beast cards. The show basically tried to say that everything was connected by the time that you got to the end, and so it makes it difficult to guess exactly how each part of the story is connected to other parts. But knowing that in some unclear way, Season 1's story of the Sacred Beasts and Season 3's story about the Supreme King are connected, it's possible that the Supreme King, and therefore Judai, might be descended from the Hebrews in the Book of Exodus. But, as loose as that collection of dots is, there is one more thing that makes me think that I'm right. Now, I wish I could take credit for this next part, but I actually found this in an old Tumblr post by users Ravenfall and Prismatic Bell, which suggested that the final duel between Judai and Yubel at the end of Season 3 follows the steps of a Jewish wedding. For example, a traditional wedding begins with the creation of a formal wedding contract called a ketubah, which would include the payment of a dowry from the bride's family. Taking Yubel to be the bride in this context, she plays the card Spell Chronicle, which she describes by saying, Judai, this scroll depicts our future together. What's more, its effect requires that Yubel pay 5 cards from her deck in order to activate it, fulfilling the conditions of a dowry. The wedding must be witnessed by at least 2 guests who cannot be related to either the bride or the groom and cannot be related to each other. Judai is actually standing with 4 friends when Yubel challenges him to this duel, and the show makes a very strong point to split them up so that this duel is only witnessed by Sho and Ojama Yellow. During the wedding, the bride circles the groom 7 times. In this duel, Yubel successfully attacks Jaden 7 times, usually with an ability that encircles him in some way. Also during the wedding, there are 2 points where the bride and groom are meant to drink wine as a symbol of the couple's shared life. Air Hummingbird restores Jaden's life points using Yubel's hand twice, symbolically passing life from one to the other. And per the terms of the wedding contract, the groom is supposed to present the bride with a ring. When Spell Chronicle, the card that represents their wedding contract, forces Judai to pick a card to return to Yubel, he chooses to give her Super Polymerization, which will end up being the card that binds them together. And finally, at the end of the wedding, the couple breaks a symbolic glass together. And when Judai uses Super Polymerization to join with Yubel, Sho begins to cry, and amidst his tears, the Supreme King's symbol of power is drawn out and shatters with the sound of a breaking glass. At this point, the couple goes into seclusion to consummate their marriage, and of course, Judai and Yubel disappear together for the length of an episode before dropping back in on Judai's friends. And there's the obvious most important detail, Judai and Yubel fuse together. They are joined together for all of eternity, the two souls becoming one. This duel was already widely interpreted as a wedding to begin with, but throw in all of these little things that could be interpreted as traditional in nature, and yeah, it makes a compelling argument for the idea that Yuki Judai could read as a Jewish character.
But where does sexuality come into play? Sure, Judai likes his monster ladies, but who doesn't?
Well, if you take the fusion with Yubel as a symbolic wedding, it's important to understand something about Yubel. I've been using feminine pronouns to refer to Yubel up until this point because that's what both the dub and the official subtitles do, but gender is kind of a fluid thing with Yubel. In a flashback sequence where we see Yubel and the ancient Judai's father, Yubel started out as an ordinary human, and, according to the behind-the-scenes material on the Japanese GX DVDs, that human was born male. Yet after being transformed into a dragon monster, the character has both a masculine and a feminine voice,
10代だってできるはずないよ。
デモンバルサムトークン2体を生贄に。
and, at various points throughout the series, the character is referred to as both he and she. When talking to or about Judai, Yubel tends to use the feminine voice while also using the masculine self-pronoun boku.
僕のターン。
Yubel is a character who very easily falls into a transgender reading of the narrative. And this isn't the first time we've seen this sort of dynamic in Judai's life. Yubel has a striking visual similarity to Judai's elemental hero Flame Wingman card, especially with the release of the Loving Defender Forever variant. And I don't have to tell you that Flame Wingman is a card fused by combining the masculine elemental hero Avion with the feminine elemental hero Burstinatrix, making this fusion of male and female characteristics a persistent concept in the show since its very first episode. And hey, it's not like this is the only sexual overtone in the franchise. You've got your eye candy like the Harpy Ladies and the Dark Magician Girl, Yugi and the Pharaoh have a sort of bondage kink king look going for them, and the whole sharing a body, the Pharaoh is inside of Yugi thing. Look, that's never been my particular reading of their relationship, but I get where the show's Yu-Gi-Oh nickname came from. Then GX took all these elements and cranked them up to 11. In Season 1, we have the infamous episode featuring the Shadow Rider Tanya, a big-chested Amazon lady who singles out Bastion Mizawa among all the boys at the academy to be her husband. In one particularly uncomfortable scene, Bastion tries to impress her by beating her in a duel, only for the two to spend the entire night dueling with each other. He's repeatedly defeated until she finally leaves him breathless and broken on the ground, declaring that a husband like him could never satisfy her. At which point, he comes out of her coliseum, disheveled with his jacket uncharacteristically open, looking like he's trapped in an afterglow. And then we find out that the cougar lady is actually a tiger, so do with that information what you will. This theme is also present in Zane Truesdale's story. Following his graduation from Duel Academy, Zane begins a short-lived career in the pro dueling circuit, unfortunately losing in his first ever pro match against Aster Phoenix. This leads him into his bad boy phase, where he begins wearing a big leather coat and participating in illegal underground tournaments in which participants wear electroshock collars that give him a jolt whenever they take damage. But Zane isn't really bothered by getting tased while he's playing cards. Instead, he gets really into it.
Trust me, when I started dueling in the underground, I felt the same way. But then, I discovered the pleasure of pain.
Yeah, man, that's what we like to call a kink. I bring up all of these sexual overtones so that we can all be on the same page that this series is a little fucked up. Like, I don't want people accusing me of projecting mature content onto this kid's show. This is all here, and it's not subtle. So where does all this leave us with Judai? Well, in the first few seasons, Judai mostly felt indifferent towards love. A few characters have made passes at him, and he always seems either clueless or annoyed by the attention. The English dub did give him a few lines implying that he has a thing for Alexis.
So you impressed?
Impressed? I think I'm in love.
But in the Japanese version, he's kind of oblivious to whether or not people are attractive because they're not trading cards, and that's really all he's about. People argue about whether or not they think that certain lines between him and Asuka read as flirtatious or interested. Don't know. I think you could read it either way, but by the time we get to Season 3, any crush that he may have had on her has long since been replaced by two new characters, Yubel and Johan. Yubel loves Judai. This is something that is explicitly and repeatedly stated, with them going so far as to refer to him as my beloved Judai. And it's worth noting that past Judai is devastated that Yubel turned themselves into a monster for him, and promises to love them forever. implying that he reciprocated Yubel's feelings before the transformation. But if Yubel loves Judai, and at least some version of Judai loves Yubel, why are they the villain of the story? Well, this gets a little convoluted and definitely unhealthy, but essentially, Yubel has a pretty warped definition of love. Understand that this creature is hundreds, if not thousands of years old. They've stayed attached to Judai's soul over that entire time, existing only as its protector every time it incarnated on Earth. Maybe Judai is the first reincarnation of the Supreme King, maybe not. Doesn't really matter. Yubel's been alone, just clinging on to this one spirit. And as all the familiar parts of life have moved on and faded away as the world changed, Judai's spirit was the one thing keeping Yubel grounded. But Judai wasn't born remembering anything about his past life. He just had his own imaginary best friend who was there from the day that he was born to tell him how loved he was and how they would always be together. Of course, he loved them in return, but Yubel's perception of reality was already getting shaky from centuries of time spent alone between reincarnations, and so they were hyper-vigilant and protective over Judai. They were familiar with the dangerous origins of the Duel Monsters card game, so they see anyone playing cards with Judai as someone threatening his life. So anytime Judai duels against other kids, Yubel goes full-on retribution on them, leaving several kids in Judai's orbit permanently harmed. As this was going on, the Kaiba Corporation was conducting some card game-related space exploration research and hosted a competition to send several card designs into space. Sounds stupid? You're not wrong. Yubel's cards were among the cards that Judai submitted into the competition, and so, for the first time in centuries, the pair were separated from one another, and Yubel didn't understand why. Worse still, the Kaiba Corp shuttle that Yubel's card was on passed through an anomaly called the Light of Destruction, which was just a prolonged, agonizing experience for Yubel. And they couldn't comprehend why Judai would do this. They love each other, right? Surely Judai wouldn't betray them. Surely the pain and loneliness had a purpose. Surely this must just be the way that Judai shows his love. So while Judai was just a child who didn't understand his violent invisible friend, in Yubel's mind, this was a calculated act of love, and therefore, pain and love became synonymous with one another in their mind. So Yubel made it their goal to hurt Judai as much as possible as an expression of love. There's also another disturbing metaphor that's thrown in there. During Yubel's suffering in space, they psychically cried out to Judai for help, but he was a kid alone on Earth. There was nothing that he could do, so he would just be struck by these horrific nightmares of Yubel being tortured whenever he fell asleep. Eventually, his parents consented to have electroshock therapy performed on Judai in order to suppress his memories of the nightmares and cut off his psychic connection with Yubel. And while his parents couldn't possibly have understood what they were doing, this seems remarkably similar to the sort of shock treatments used in gay conversion therapy. Metaphorically, this treatment ended their queer relationship and made Judai quote-unquote normal. That's a lot for a kid's show about trading cards. But we're not done yet, because then we have Johan. Johan is a transfer student who comes in at the start of the season, and, much like Judai, he has the ability to see and communicate with monster spirits. In the English dub, his name's Jesse, and he's a good old boy from Texas. You wouldn't exactly call him a machismo character, but Jesse's definitely got some grit to him, and he's very much written to sound like someone's supportive BFF. In a lot of ways, his friendship with Jaden is similar to that of Joey Wheeler's friendship with Yugi Moto. But the way their friendship kicks off is a little abrupt. Judai and Johan hit it off very quickly, with both acknowledging that they've never met anyone like the other before. There are long, thoughtful looks shared between them. Judai starts to ignore the rest of his friends to hang out with Johan, and when the weird side of the plot gets going, he puts a lot of his faith in Johan when it would logically make more sense for him to work with characters like Sho, Monjome, and Asuka, who have all been around since the first season and are very familiar with all the weirdness that tends to take place on the island. This might not necessarily read as anything other than a fast-developing friendship, but let's really take a look at Johan himself. In the Japanese version, he's a transfer kid from Scandinavia. He's voiced by a woman to give him an effeminate quality, he's soft-spoken, gentle, and affectionate, and his deck revolves around the rainbow dragon archetype, which many interpret to be a nod to the rainbow flag that has been adopted as an icon of the gay and queer communities. In his earliest appearances, this could raise the classic question of whether or not we're supposed to read this character as being gay, or just European.
Is he gay? Or European?
Both Johan and Yubel can be seen as romantic interests for Judai and foils for one another, with Yubel representing a sort of ex-partner in Judai's life, while Johan is viewed as the new relationship. But where things get interesting is when all of these characters meet. Partway through the season, the Duel Academy ends up being teleported off the face of the Earth and into a new monster-infested dimension where the students are under constant siege. While the team tries to figure out how to go back home, Yubel possesses a young student named Marcel, which ultimately leads to a duel with Judai. Now Yubel has stacked their deck with the Sacred Beast cards, while Judai is drained from a continuous series of duels and everything that's happened in the monster world so far. So Yubel has the advantage, at least until Johan joins the duel on Judai's side. This is where Yubel begins to see Johan as a threat. He risks his life to protect Judai, and, at the duel's climax, he summons the Rainbow Dragon to battle the combined Sacred Beast monster, Armatile. Both Johan and Yubel's life points are zeroed out, leaving Judai as the duel's winner. Duel Academy is transported back to Earth, but Johan and Yubel are nowhere to be found. They were left behind. And losing Johan has a profound effect on Judai. We know that Judai, appropriate to his playing style, has a great big hero complex and always wants to do everything to take care of pretty much everyone around him. But we've seen him fail before, and it's never affected him the way that losing Johan does. This is hitting him harder than almost anything we've seen him go through before, to the point where he decides to go dimension hopping by himself in order to find this new person in his life. His friends end up going with him, cause, they don't want to see him get himself dead, but that ends up being a serious mistake,
as Judai's reckless need to save Johan puts them all in danger.
But what happened to Johan and Yubel? Well, after the rest of Duel Academy escaped from them, Yubel decided to possess Johan next, and man oh man, there are some creepy ways that you can choose to read that decision. Yubel loves Judai, and fears that Judai's love might have moved on to Johan, and so Yubel decides to become Johan, as if they're saying, will you love me if I'm like this, Judai? If I become him, will you love me again? It's misguided, but it's also so tragic. You can follow the logic train, but also recognize just how insane it is. But there's also a predatory element to it, with Yubel entering Johan's body, stripping him of his agency and his free will. The assault metaphor is uncomfortable, and given the metaphor we've discussed as dueling equals sex, the idea that Yubel would force Judai to duel them in this form is just wrong. Like, as an evil character goes, Yubel commits some of the most deranged offenses of the entire franchise. But ever the hero, Judai doesn't see Yubel as a villain. Instead, he sees them for the pain and the suffering that they've endured and decides to make things right. He chooses to give his love to Yubel by fusing with them, allowing the gentle darkness within him to purify the light of destruction that warped their mind and their sanity. Judai and Yubel are bound together for all of time. Then, going into the show's final season, Johan is no longer a main character on the show. He returns to Scandinavia or Texas or wherever, only to return in the last few episodes. Though brief, this return appearance is significant, as it marks a new dynamic in their relationship. Judai and Johan acknowledge how they feel about each other, with both yearning to duel against each other again and again, with both acknowledging that they might become jealous when the other duels someone else. But Judai chose Yubel. He has a responsibility to them and the relationship that they've forged, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't still care and yearn for Johan. And, in the end, it's what saves Judai from the darkness and allows him to go on to become the light that saves the world. So where does all of this leave us? Well, the answer to that is that it kind of leaves you wherever you want. Like I said in the beginning, this is just one way that you could interpret the text of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but it's far from being canonically confirmed, and for every piece of evidence that I've cited, you can probably find a way to write it off as meaning something else.
But what I do love about looking at GX through this lens is just how real it feels. Maybe not the monsters and the mayhem, but the sense of self-discovery. High school is this once-in-a-lifetime time in our lives where we get to grow up, find out who we are, and that's exactly what the characters in GX do. Through this lens, Judai explores every aspect of his identity, from religion to sexuality to what it means to be a good person. And by the time the curtain closes on GX, he's only just begun his journey, having learned just enough to show him how much he has left to learn. And that's beautiful. It's something that's resonated with me for 20 years now, and while I was much more focused on girls and grades at that age, I hope this video means something to all those who can see themselves in the hero of heroes, Yuki Judai.
But I'd love to hear what you think down below in the comments. If you enjoyed the analysis in this video, hit the subscribe bell thing so that you don't miss a slew of other character analysis videos that I've got cooking. Next up will be a video exploring why Joey Wheeler, and not Yugi Moto, is the one and only true king of games. I'm going back to my editor's cave to work on that, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!